Howdy, y'all. Welcome to the ICOF Art Podcast, the Fart Pod. And today we're talking about art calls. Call for artists. You may have seen this term before. Call for artists. A call for art. What is a call for art? We're going to get into it in this video. We're going to explain what it is. We're going to talk about the different types. We're going to talk about where you can find them, why you should maybe consider applying and submitting to them, some tips on how to do so, the challenges that come with these things, and some other tidbits of information. Let's just get right down to it. What is a call for artists? This is a post, a statement, an article published by an art commissioning agency that might look like a city, might be an arts council, a group of people who want artwork, and therefore they are reaching out to the public and asking artists for submissions. It's a pretty decent strategy for building owners, business owners, or just people that want to support the arts or commission artwork. It's usually for public projects if they're posting it publicly. It's good for a number of reasons for commissioning artwork, because typically the post, the publication, the article, whatever, is shareable on social media platforms, and it usually provides that commissioning agency with a variety of options to choose from among a list of artists. And it really just allows them to find the best artist for the project that they are seeking for. And there's a lot of different types of calls for artists. These can be for exhibitions. Maybe it's a gallery that's putting out the call. They're looking for people to submit to their exhibitions, maybe just a single piece, maybe a number of pieces. Maybe they're calling for artists to submit to do a whole show, a whole exhibition in their gallery. These could be for grants. So maybe there's a foundation of arts that has a certain amount of money allotted to support artists in their craft, their creative process, and so you can apply for a grant through them. Or it could be specific projects, individual projects, such as a mural, which is what I have my experience in with calls for artists. It could be a public sculpture. It could be any sort of art installation that can activate a space in public. An example of this would be Kansas City, where I live and work out of, just built a new airport, and they had a number of call to artists in their build, their new construction. They had murals, they had sculpture installations, they had sort of some interactive light displays that were involved in the new construction. Shout out to ITRA Icons, my homies. They did a mural in the new space. Kwanzaa Humphrey, a former studio mate of mine at Interurban Art House, did a bunch of canvas paintings for the new airport. So a variety of art calls were put out by the Kansas City airport. A lot of the calls I've submitted to have actually been for festivals. So that's another type of art call. It's not necessarily for a specific commission gig, but for an event. So that's a different type. And these can look a little bit different. In the two major types of calls for artists that I want to highlight in today's little discussion here about calls for artists are requests for proposals and requests for qualifications. These might look really similar, but there's a couple key differences between the two types. Both of these are going to ask for your portfolio as an artist. They're going to ask for a resume or a CV, an artist CV. What is a CV? I don't even know. Artist CV. An artist CV is a record of all your professional activities, usually intended for use in academic situations, as well as for applications to employment opportunity. And it stands for curriculum vitae. Must be Latin. So that's what it is, kind of like a resume. Anyway, it's going to ask for those things, your portfolio, a resume, CV, and then that third thing is a statement. It could be an artist statement, a bio, or a statement of interest for the project in particular that you are applying for. for the artist call. And this could be kind of like a cover letter if you're applying for jobs, something like that, very similar. But the key difference between a request for proposal and a request for qualification, RFP, versus RFQ is a concept design. This is important. We'll get into this a little bit more later in the end of the episode. But usually a request for proposal is asking for a full-on proposal. They're like, give us all of these things that I just mentioned, the portfolio, the resume, the statement of interest. And on top of that, we want your proposition for this project specifically. Say it's a mural call. It's a call for muralists. They not only want all those things I just mentioned, your portfolio, but they also want a design specific to this project. They want to see what you would do if they select you as their artist. And, there's some issues with that, and I'm going to explain later, but we're going to keep the ball rolling. I'm just bringing it up because it's different types, RFQ versus RFP. And we're going to be kind of focusing more on the specific project calls that are put out. If you're somebody who's interested in submitting to calls for exhibitions or calls for grants, or residencies is another type, calls for artists for an art residency. I don't have a ton of experience with that, but there are also calls that exist for those specific things. And maybe in the future I will try to do some of those. I'm sure I will. I've always wanted to do an artist residency, so maybe someday I will have more information on that. But I'm sure the information's out there. So today we're going to be specifically focusing on specific project art calls. So where can you find these art calls? Firstly, social media. A lot of commissioning entities will post about it on Facebook or on Instagram even. Social media platforms, LinkedIn. And I found a couple gigs through social media posts. A lot of my followers actually will link me or tag me in these posts. And I'm always super grateful for that because I have missed opportunities because I didn't see them. So when my followers tag me in these posts, I always appreciate that. Yeah, that's just one way, social media. Another valuable resource that I have found is a website called Cafe. Cafe is basically a search engine platform that these commissioning agencies can actually use to find artists, and artists can then go and search for calls that are put into the platform by commissioning agencies. Cafe stands for call for entry. Capital C, lowercase a, capital F, capital E, cafe.com.org. Just search call for entry cafe and I'm sure it'll come up. And speaking of search, another way you can find calls for artists are Google search. Just type it into Google. Type in call for art, call for artist, call for muralist, call for sculpture, whatever your medium is, you can search that way in Google. And actually a bonus method of searching for these, I actually did this last year. I paid for a local street art enthusiast. His name is Brandon. He's an individual that actually just follows a lot of street art festivals and is kind of in the street art community, both in Kansas City, but also around the country. And so I knew that he had kind of access and a little bit more of a network than I did on social media. And so I was like, hey, can I just pay you once a month to do a search for me so I don't have to worry about it? Because it does take some time and energy to search for active calls. And it was worth it to pay him because although it was an investment up front monetarily, it saved me time and I ended up getting my biggest gig of my life so far through one of the calls that he sent me that I might not have seen otherwise. So it's a method for you if you have money as part of your toolkit of your leverage assets. Anyway, moving on, why would you want to submit to a call for artists? What might it benefit you to do so as an artist? I think there's a number of reasons why you should consider this. One of which being that it opens the door to opportunities that you might not otherwise have. You know, a lot of being an artist is putting yourself out there, pitching yourself to people. As far as mural work goes, I have had to do some kind of cold calls or just approaching a building owner or a business owner and asking them to paint on their walls. And then on top of that to be like, hey, can I also have some money? It's just a lot of persuasion that goes on, and that's pretty difficult. Whereas an artist call, the project already exists. It's already there. They put it out there for you. You don't have to sell anything as far as convincing people to do the project. Since it already exists, all you have to do is convince them to pick you for the project, which is less persuasion. Still involves some work, but it's a little bit easier than making cold calls and fabricating your own project. So that's probably the most obvious reason to apply to artist calls as an artist. And on top of that, if you were to be awarded the commission, it's really good exposure in the community. It gives you networking opportunities because you're going to be bumping elbows with influencers in whatever community that you're going to be doing the art in. And so that's great exposure, great networking. You're going to be engaging with the community that you're creating for. And that's pretty much a priceless thing because it's kind of an energetic collaboration at that point because you're going to have input. If you're creating public art in the first place, it's going to be direct engagement with the community. You're going to be creating in public space. If you're painting a mural, you're going to be putting that mural up in public, and while you're painting it, people are going to be approaching you, asking you questions, and engaging with you directly, which could be a con to some extent, but for the most part, this is a pro. This is good for your practice as an artist, and engaging with your community is important if you're going to be doing any public work at all. And like I said about the networking, whenever you're communicating with these commissioning entities, you're going to be building relationships with city officials, with kind of movers and shakers in the art community. And that's only going to be beneficial for you as a business person, and your negotiation skills are going to level up in that process. But also, if you do a good job, then you have this network built because of this project. And, something that a lot of artist calls ask for is professional references. So the more you do, the more references you will have, and hopefully they will have something good to say about you, and it might just lead to more gigs down the line. And my last benefit for you to convince you that maybe you should consider applying to artist calls is a lot of times these setup gigs just have a higher budget. It's a higher paying gig than maybe you would be able to land elsewhere on your own, convincing somebody to hire you. And that's usually because they are backed by a foundation of some sort. Some entity or individual that had accumulated wealth has sponsored the project in their foundation, their arts foundation. So there's a certain chunk of money that's allotted to growing the arts and commissioning the arts in whatever community that individual or group belongs to. It's a good way to pay your legacy forward and support the art by funding it. So that usually, allows for more of a budget, and that budget is usually set ahead of time. And the good calls for artists have that listed, and you're able to then gauge whether it's worth your time to apply for it or not. If it's realistic, maybe that price tag is too high. You're just getting started painting murals, and this budget is for like 40 grand. You probably don't have any business even applying for that because you're probably not going to get it. You don't even have any murals under your belt. You don't have anything that you've been paid for even close to that. So it might not even be worth your time. That's a pretty big gamble. I'm not saying don't do it. If you have the time, maybe just go for it. But you always want to be shooting just ahead of where your actual value is with your art. And the same goes the other way. Maybe a small budget. Maybe it's just $1,000 for an 1,000 square foot mural. If somebody has that budget for that size, that's disrespectful from that entity, and they just don't really understand what things cost. But you probably shouldn't apply to that either, no matter what level you are. Unless you've never painted any mural, then I guess at least it's going to pay for paint, maybe. So, I'm just giving my advice. This is not black and white. So you're thinking about applying. Maybe you found some artist calls on your search, your Google search on cafe website, and now you want to go ahead and make that submission. Well, I just have a couple tips for you before you do, some things to keep in mind. Make sure, first of all, that the project aligns with your brand. If the project is asking for a theme, a mural that is themed around, social inclusivity, and it wants to highlight the indigenous culture of the region that you're painting in, but you're a white boy like me, maybe that's not for you. It's not that that theme isn't worth your time and energy. It's just you don't really have the voice for that, and it doesn't really align with your brand and what art you kind of already make, if that makes sense. So like, I always look for calls that are asking for themes that have general concepts of nature and community and more generalized themes like that, because that is in line with my work. I do a lot of nature stuff already, so if I see a call that they are looking for a nature-themed mural, I know that's right on. Maybe they're asking for greetings from this city type of mural, one of those postcard murals, but you don't do calligraphy or you don't do text in your work. You're not really a graphics kind of guy or gal or whatever. That's probably not for you either. Doesn't align with your brand. I'm not saying you can't stretch yourself a little bit in order to get a good gig if it's going to be worth it, if the budget is attractive or if the location is really good for you. I'm not trying to deter you 100%, but just don't waste your own time and apply for a gig that isn't appropriate for you. My second tip is, once you start applying for these more regularly, you're going to want to just kind of have a template for your submission. This is not to say to copy paste and submit the same proposal for every gig. It's just, you're going to have a portfolio eventually. You're going to be building up a portfolio, and I just think it's a good idea to have it organized ahead of time. Have a folder on your desktop that is specific to these submissions, and that'll have your portfolio, your separate files for images of your past work, because they're going to ask for that every time. Maybe you have a general statement of interest typed up in a Word document, and you can just plug in specifics about the project, like I'm excited to paint for your city. Then you change that your city to the actual city that the project is in, stuff like that. And you're going to want to have your artist statement on hand that you can kind of just rework and add a little bit of details or subtract some things. Just have that document ready to edit so you don't have to rewrite it every single time. Things like this will save you time whenever you're doing the submission process. Make sure you have your resume, your CV, your links to your social media account on the ready. So you can just kind of drag and drop, and you can submit to multiple things in a day, and it just doesn't take that much time. Less of a gamble that way. Speaking of social media and online presence and portfolio stuff, another piece of advice that I would give is to curate your website, your digital online portfolio, your Instagram feed to projects that you want to have the opportunity for. So my website, for example, if you go to ikoff.com, the first thing that you see pop up is a mural that I painted, because I want people to hire me for murals, and I'm applying to a lot of open calls for a muralist. So I want the first thing that they see when they visit my website, because I'm going to have that link in my submission, is going to be a mural. And then one of my pull down menus is murals. I want them to easily be able to see that and then see an extended portfolio of my mural works. It's just easier for the people who are going to hire me to do murals, to see the murals that I've painted. And similarly with your Instagram, I know Instagram is social media. You might have some personal things on your Instagram. I would kind of advise against that. Don't have a picture of you and your buddies at the bar last weekend when you have professionals trying to hire you professionally and pay you money for a gig, for a job, and don't have those two things mixed up. You know what I mean? You're going to want to have a more professional portfolio, even curated beyond that. So, for example, on my Instagram page, I do a reel every day. I wake up and I sketch a little doodle every morning and I time lapse it, and then I post that to reels every day. And those reels will show up in my feed because I have it automatically set to that, and I want it to be like that for a day or so. But then after a day or so of that reel being posted, I want to go ahead and remove that from my profile grid so that my grid is a little bit more curated and it has some of my more finished works, some of my more high caliber artwork and murals, so that when they go to my Instagram, people that are trying to hire me will see more professional work. Another piece of advice is, once you start submitting to these call for artists, I would just make it a habit to search regularly. I usually spend a day or two every month. I just pick a day on the weekend or something to to search call for entry, that website, to do a quick Google search for calls to artists. Sometimes I'll do call for muralists specifically, open call for art, try a couple different keywords there. Yeah, just do a search, make it a regular habit, because these calls are put out at different times throughout the year. I would say, at least in the Midwest, when the weather is best, it's usually summer and fall. So you see these art calls popping up, late winter. They start happening even as early as January for the rest of the year. So just make sure you get a habit of checking on a regular basis. And a sub-tip for this piece of advice, a tip of the tip, I would suggest refining your search to those keywords, but then on top of that, if you search on Google, there's a way to refine the tools, the search tool. So you see the search bar, and then to the right below the search bar, it'll have a drop-down menu that says tools, and you can edit that, and it's like a time period. Let me see exactly what it says. It's like all the way to the right, there's all filters, and then it says tools. It'll have two different drop box menus. It'll say anytime and all results. Those drop down. So if you go to any time, you can select past hour, past 24 hours, past week, past month, past year, and then it allows for a custom range. I suggest past month. Then it allows you to search any new article or post on the internet that has been published in the last month, and that should be a pretty good range. It's pretty recent, but not too recent. And usually these calls are active for a month or more. A lot of times it's like a month to 3 months that these calls will be active in order for these entities that are commissioning art to get some interest from artists in that time frame. And my last suggestion for you is just don't put all your eggs in one basket. I've made the mistake of being selected as a finalist for an art call. So a lot of art calls will design it to where they look for finalists. They request your qualifications, and then they search through your qualifications and they select like a top 3 or a top 5 artists. And they ask those artists to design a proposal. This is the proper way to do it, in my opinion, because they'll offer a design stipend, a sketch fee, and then sometimes they'll put it for a public vote. Sometimes they'll just have a committee in place to decide among the proposals who will be selected. And I made the mistake of my giant hubris. My ego got in the way. I thought I was issuing for a gig that I was a finalist for. I thought out of the 3 submissions, they posted them publicly so I could see what the other artists designed for. And I thought mine was the best, to be quite honest. I thought I had the best design. Spent a lot of time on it. Spent maybe 3 or 4 whole days on it, making this design in Procreate. And I didn't get the gig. Still got paid for my sketch and the time, but my hopes were way the F up. Everybody that was in my community and that followed me and saw all the other submissions were reinforcing my belief that mine was the best. And I didn't get it, and it hurt. So don't get your hopes up for these gigs. It might sound like it's perfect for you. You might think that you're the best artist for the job, but you just don't know what these people want. Art is subjective after all, and it's just really hard to tell what these people had in mind when they put out the call. A lot of times they're vague in their description. They don't really ask for what they want. So just don't put your eggs in one basket. Make sure that you are putting an adequate amount of time for each gig. Don't spend too much time on a proposal. Spend just enough to where you think you could land the gig, but don't overextend yourself, because that can get messy, especially if you're not getting paid for your time. Speaking of messiness, let's talk about the downsides of applying to art calls, to open calls. What are the challenges that come with submitting to these calls for artists? I'm going to tell you right off the bat. Some entries cost a fee. I think this is asinine. Most of the time when an art agency is asking for a fee just to submit to their call, they don't have their priorities in line. They don't have the best interest for the artist in mind. I see this more with calls for exhibitions, like if it's a well-known gallery that's international and they want you to submit a proposal to submit your artwork. I will say that the one that I actually have paid for specifically, and I just want to mention them in particular because it's a really awesome festival, is the Fraser Mountain Mural Festival. I've got a couple of videos on my YouTube channel that show my experience with this festival. I've been twice now, and actually last year I was the grand prize winner, and it was a $10,000 award for a commission of a new mural, and that made it so worth it. The entry fee was $25, so it wasn't super steep. I don't know, they are a fundraising entity. They are raising money to put back into the arts in their community, so it's kind of more justifiable than some some of these other ones. I only say that because in case anybody from the Fraser Public Arts Committee is watching this, I'm not hating on y'all. I'd love to come back. I'm not going this year, but maybe next year. I'm not trying to hate on your guys' entry fee, but just for artists, okay, be aware. Sometimes people charge a fee, and if you're just getting started and you don't have any work, but you do have some money, maybe you still have a full-time job, so you have the cash to leverage in order to catapult your art career, leverage that. Go ahead and put the fee in. Who cares? If that's what it takes to get yourself out there and to build your portfolio, it's not as bad. But once you're kind of at my stage, I'm like just a little bit beyond emerging artist, kind of established myself, but I'm not totally getting a bunch of people asking me to do murals yet. I'm still applying for a lot of stuff. And, I just kind of decided not to do ones that require a fee. I think I can find work elsewhere. Another challenge in submitting to art calls is if your portfolio is weak, if you're just starting out and you don't have a lot of art, it's really hard to have a strong proposal when you just don't have a portfolio to show, because that's going to be the most important part of your submission. I would even argue more than the design if they're asking for a design, just because they need to see what you can do and what your murals actually look like, or your sculptures, or your art installations, whatever. So the way around this, obviously, is to do work. You might have to paint some free walls. I painted a bunch of panels out in my backyard. I just had a 6x4 foot wood panel that I just painted over and over and over again, and I kind of used that as my portfolio. I went out and I did some free walls. I did some underpass walls that I just spray painted. That's not technically legal, so I can't advise that, but that's the risk I was willing to take, and it was enough to build a portfolio. So the biggest downside to submitting to an art call is it is a huge risk and a gamble of your time. If it's a request for proposals, remember the RFP, these are the ones that are requesting a full-on proposal, including a design, a concept sketch. To be quite honest, RFPs suck. They are taking advantage of artists because ultimately only one artist is going to get chosen to do the project, and therefore only one person is getting paid for their time. Everybody else that submitted that got rejected is just donating their time and risking and gambling their time where they could be doing other projects that fulfill their lives or getting paid for. They're gambling. And if you are an art commissioning agency or a city, municipality, an arts council that is commissioning artwork and is putting out a request for proposals and asking for free designs, you're not supporting art. You're not supporting artists. You're taking advantage of artists, and that's not right. I'm going to have a rant video that is going a little in depth with my emotions on this subject and my thoughts and my philosophies, but that's not for you because we're artists here. We're here to support each other. No negativity, okay? That's for the people that are doing wrong to us as artists. And although I am saying these negative things, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it as artists, especially as you're starting out. Like I said, you might have to do some free stuff. You might have to make these gambles. I did. I've applied to several dozen art calls, and I've only been awarded like a handful, okay? This year alone, it's July, middle of 2023, to put a date and a timestamp on this podcast episode. I have submitted over 20 submissions, proposals for art calls. Most of them festivals, a lot of them mural gigs, paid commissions, and I've gotten 2 of them for a grand total of, $13,000. So that's actually not bad. One was $8,000 and the other was $5,000. So by the time those are said and done, hopefully my time will be paid for. So I shouldn't really rag on it. But like the percentage is low. That's less than 10%, right? Of all the submissions that I've made this year. Those are just things to look out for, things to consider before submitting to these. You got to be understanding of what your time is worth and make sure you have a balance. Don't spend all your time submitting to calls. Spend a decent amount of time, especially if you've not done anything, because let me tell you something. On the bright side, submitting to these calls is actually how I began my professional career as a muralist. I somehow landed a gig in North Kansas City when I had never painted a professional mural. I painted some murals, like I said, some small walls and on these panels in my backyard. And honestly, my canvas portfolio is pretty decent, so I don't want to make it sound like it was totally random and totally lucky. You got to make sure you got your chops up in order to land something. But my first professional mural was from a RFP. free. A request for proposals I designed for free. I spent probably 2.5 days designing on Procreate just for the chance to maybe land this paying gig. But I got it. They granted me the award. I got paid for this mural, and I thought I was deserving of it. It was a great design. I executed awesome. It was a good final result. So like totally fair, good, on value, on point. Actually, I undersold it. They listed the budget for I think $8,000 for this mural, which I really don't think I had any business getting paid, to be honest, for my first official mural. Not that I don't think I'm worthy, I do, but I actually undersold them. I think I bid the job for like $6,500. So I cut their budget by $1,500. I like to think they picked me for my design and my portfolio and my style, but I don't know, it's hard to believe that they didn't consider that saving of the budget to choose me. So I don't know. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm not telling you to sell yourself short, but it's a strategy. It's a strategy to land your first gig, especially if you don't have the portfolio to back you up. It's something to consider. If the budget is beyond you, it's worth a shot. Offer something less, something that you're still getting paid adequately for your time and talent, but until you have a portfolio, maybe take a little less money, because some of these budgets are pretty high. Within reason. Obviously, don't try and sell a $4,000 mural on a $40,000 budget, because I think they're probably just looking for something entirely different caliber. But, I don't know. Do what you want with your time. Gamble how you will. And after that first gig, I have gotten several other paid gigs through that project. People have seen that mural. It's on public display. Like I said, I remember me telling you about exposure in my reasons why you should consider that. Well, here's an example. I've gotten probably 5 or 6 paid jobs from that mural. So, whatever money I discounted them, I got paid more than that in other gigs. So it definitely made up for the risk that I took and the selling of myself short. And since then, I have gotten, I think, 5 other municipal commissions. So cities that have commissioned me that I've been successful in submitting proposals for, they chose me as their artist through these art calls, which I think is probably a decent percentage. I feel pretty proud of that. 6 municipal commissions in basically like 2 years, really, 2.5 years. I feel like that's not normal. So like I said, don't get your hopes up with me saying this, but it can happen. And I do put time into these. I like to gamble on this. I know I had warnings before, but it's worth it to me to gamble. And I will say that the more you do, the less of a gamble it is, because you'll get better at even doing design sketches. It'll take less time, and submitting these proposals. I mean, I can submit a proposal in probably like 10, 15 minutes, even including the statement of interest. So you get faster the more you do. And last year, I actually booked my biggest gig of all time, well, second biggest gig of all time, through an artist call. It was a $15,000 gig, and it was all the way in Oregon, across the country. So that was pretty cool. And that design I did in like an hour and a half the day it was due. I submitted like 4 hours before the deadline cutoff. So it was like a last minute submission. I didn't think I was going to get it. It was a total shot in the dark, but I got it. So there's a couple success stories for you. Hopefully that's motivational. Hopefully that's inspiring after my warnings and my cautionary tales as well. So in conclusion, to wrap this up, mural calls can be a great way to find opportunities to get paid for your art, trying to make a career out of your art. You gotta at least consider it. You gotta at least see what's out there. There's gonna be eventually some project that you're gonna be perfect for, and you should just at least apply, at least throw your name in the hat. It's money on the table that you're leaving if you don't apply to at least, a few of these a year. Come on, give yourself a chance. These are good projects overall, despite some of the ethics involved in some of these organizations that are asking for free designs and whatnot. Sometimes it might be worth it for you to take that risk. So I don't think they should do it, but maybe you should take the risk, especially if you're just starting out. I think you should go for it. Stay tuned for that rant video, though, of me trying to persuade any commissioning organization to do RFQs instead. Just request portfolios. Come on, you still get what you want. Pay 3 or 5 artists to do designs. You got the budget anyway. Allot some of that budget to those artists. Those are the best. So I always support those submissions over any other. You have a chance to make money just sketching. That's actually pretty great. Some of these fees can be, low as $100, probably not worth your time, but it's something. I've gotten paid $1,000 to sketch. That's great. $1,000 for a couple days worth of sketch and putting a portfolio together. I like it. That might be a way to make money anyway. I mean, I've gotten 3 or 4 of those gigs already. that I didn't paint the mural, but at least I got paid for my design. It's like I'm still making money, so that's great. I also have a video out that I did like a year and a half ago that I go through the process of actually submitting an application. So make sure you check that out on my YouTube channel. I think it's called How to Apply for Art Calls or Mural Calls or something. I'll put a link in the description. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful, inspirational, motivational, instructional, educational. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. See you next time.